you enjoy the video, consider subscribing because this channel is new and I'll be working a lot on tackling these kinds of topics of English grammar. So look forward to that. Okay, let's start. So, what are phrasal verbs? Right, the topic's name is phrases and clauses. We will understand what these components mean. We will talk about phrasal verbs and then we will talk about, how to identify them. First, let's talk about phrasal verbs. So, if we see the definition, it says that phrasal verbs are verbs combined with one or two particles, which can be either a preposition or it can be an adverb. Now we have to understand the components. What are verbs? What are prepositions? And what are adverbs? And what do all of them mean to understand how this is working? Okay, so first of all, let's kind of try to understand what verbs mean. I'm sure some of you may know that verbs are primarily action words. So what this means is some kind of activity, some kind of action is being performed. So for example, sleeping, again, the fact that sleeping is not doing an activity, but it is still considered an action. Then reading, writing, all these are actions. Then there is, as you can see from the examples, the word break, look, and give. Don't focus on the other word for now, just focus on break, look, and give. These words are also verbs because they are also telling us an action. Now, prepositions. What are prepositions? They tell us the position of something, right? So prepositions tell us the position of something when we are specifically talking about prepositions of place. When we are talking about prepositions of time or direction, this can change. Now it can't be no longer about positioning. For time it can be something with reference to time, or with direction, words like towards, through, and something with reference to direction. Then there are adverbs. So adverbs are describing words. So adverbs are what? Describing words for what? For a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. So just like an adjective is a describing word for a noun, adverb is a describing word for a verb, adjective, or an adverb itself. Okay, now you kind of get the idea of what are verbs. So verbs are action words primarily, because there are other forms of verbs as well, but for here we focus on action words. Then there are prepositions which talk about position. If we are talking about place, then prepositions of times are also there, and preposition of direction is also there. Then adverbs talk about, they tell us more about a verb, an adjective, or an adverb. Now I'll try to tell you from the example how these components are working. Okay, so phrasal verbs are verbs combined with one or two particles that create a meaning different from the original verb. So like I told you, if you see the examples break, look, and give, just saying this word itself, it is like an original verb, right? It's just like a base form of the verb, like break, look, give. Some kind of action is happening in each. Now if you add a different component to this, to the base verb, it can change meaning. How? Like you can say break up, okay, look after, give up. So up, again, it can be an adverb of place, after can be preposition of time. So we have added something to the base verb, and then it kind of changes the meaning from the original verb. So break means, you break something, so you break it in two halves or something like that. But if you add up, then you can use that for talking about a relationship. If you say look, looking is just like seeing something, but then if you had after it, then it changes to take care of. So look after means to take care of something. So she looks after her younger brother. So that means taking care of. She takes care of her younger brother. Then give up. So give is to like give someone, hand someone something. But then give up is to stop trying. It's like quitting. Give up means to quit. So he gave up smoking last year. So he quit smoking last year. So did you notice how just by adding these components after the base verb, or like the action word, your meaning has changed, and that is what makes it a phrasal verb. Okay, your main component is the fact that it's a phrase. It's a phrase, and there is a difference between a phrase and a sentence. We will discuss that. Okay, so this is the first part. Now, how will you identify a phrasal verb? Let's see that. So, if you want to identify a phrasal verb, first point is you will check for verb, and then you'll see if there is something that is attached to it, right? So, if you just see like two words or three words, so there is always some action word, and then there is something that is attached to the action word. You will check for this. Okay, so that is how you will see. Check if the verb is followed by a particle. For example, break plus up. This is the first criteria that you'll see. Second thing is there is a change in meaning. So the combination changes the meaning of the verb. Example, give plus up means to quit, not to hand over something. So that is what I mentioned. Just because you added a component, it will change the meaning of the full thing. So now it is no longer to give something. Now give up means to quit. So if you see give up, then this whole thing is a phrase. If you just see give, then it's just a verb. Okay, so phrasal verbs are some kind of action is being performed, but it's the fact that there are two words, minimum two words, that are working together and changing the meaning of the base verb. So now the two words mean something else. Okay, like just the way give up, or something, any kind of verb that works here. I hope it's clear. If there's any doubt anywhere, you can let me know in the comments. Okay, phrases. So, what is a phrase? A phrase is a group of words that work together but do not form a complete sentence because they lack a subject or a predicate. Now, we have to understand what subject and what predicate means. Okay, so what a subject means is it is the main focus of a sentence. You can take down the notes, side by side, so that it's easier for you to remember these things. Just like a small side note at the side where you're writing what is the subject. So subject is the main focus of a sentence. Now a subject can be either a noun or it can be a pronoun. Okay, these two components of a sentence are the only ones that can be a subject. Components like adverbs and adjectives and all those things, they can't be the subject. Okay, only noun or a pronoun can be the subject. So subject is what you are talking about, what is the main focus of that sentence. Clear? Next is a predicate. So what is a predicate? Is basically the rest of the part that you were telling about the subject. So for example, she likes to read. So if we see the sentence, she is the subject and this whole thing likes to read is a predicate. So predicate is kind of like the combination of verb, and then what does she like, everything else that's there in the sentence, all that will make up the predicate. So it can have the verb, it can have the adjective, it can have adverb and all the other components. It can also have a noun or pronoun. That's not the point, because noun or pronoun can also function as an object. It can also function as an object. Another thing is subject is the doer of the action. So if it is a main focus, Then it can also be the doer of the action, if there is an action that is there. So this is one thing that you have to keep in mind. So now we talk about what is a phrase. And a phrase is a group of words that work together but do not form a complete sentence because they lack a subject or a predicate. So if you see a phrase, it won't be a complete sentence. Something will lack in it. Either it won't have a subject or it won't have a predicate. Okay. Now, if we see the types of phrases, then there is noun phrase. So a group of words with noun as the main word, like these types, it's just like telling you what are the types in which the phrases can exist. So noun phrases, when the noun is the main focus, the red car, so you're basically talking about the car. Now if you see this much, it's not the complete, it's not the complete explanation of things, it's just the red car. Then if you see a verb phrase, the group of words with verb as the main word, so here running is the main focus. Then yeah, then adjective. So a group of words that describe an adjective. Very happy, very happy, so happy. And then very, something which you have used, and like adjective is the main focus. Then there is adverb phrase. So adverb is quickly, and then very quickly, so it's an adverb describing another adverb. Okay. Then there is a prepositional phrase that can also exist, so you tell the position of something. So under is the preposition, and that is what the word, like that's the word with which the preposition is starting. So under the table. I hope it's clear till now. So you have to be able to understand how will you identify the phrases. So identification of phrase, it lacks a subject and predicate, like we discussed earlier. Okay, it lacks a subject and a predicate. A phrase doesn't have both a subject and a verb. Now this part is extremely important. It won't have subject and verb both. Okay, just the way you noticed in these previous sentences, it didn't have, like it has just the red car, it just has the subject, is running fast, it just has the phrase very happy, it's something that has an adverb. Very quickly, again adverb. Under the table, so table is like the object, or it can be depending on the complete sentence, but it's not like you have a verb and a subject complete. It's not, it's just not a complete sentence. Plus if you see a phrase, it doesn't make sense, right? So this is there. Now it acts as a single part of speech, so it acts as noun, verb, adjective, adverb, or preposition, just the way we discussed all the types. So you will find phrases in one of these types. Okay. Next is clauses. Okay. So now let's discuss clauses and discuss what are clauses. So as it says here, a clause is a group of words that contain both a subject and a predicate. Clauses can be complete sentences or part of a sentence. Now what you need to understand is that a clause has both the subject, which is very important, and it has the predicate. Okay, the subject and the predicate. So it has both the subject and the predicate. But now majorly in terms of predicate, what you can understand, it can be either a complete sentence. So a complete sentence is what? A sentence is a group of words which make some sense, and a sentence is supposed to have a subject and a predicate. So if a clause has both subject and a predicate, it can very well be a complete sentence provided that it makes full sense. But if it's just a subject and it is also a verb in it, then it will be part of a sentence because then it lacks the object. So, how do you make a sentence which is a type of transitive sentence? Transitive sentences are supposed to have an object in them. So, subject, verb, and object makes transitive. Here, subject and verb. As long as you can see a subject in the sentence, and as long as you can see a verb in the sentence, your sentence will be a clause. If you have a predicate, then also it will be a clause, but it can also be counted as a complete sentence if it makes complete sense. So that is something you have to keep in mind. Now, what are the types of clauses? First is the main clause, which is also known as the independent clause. So why do we call this independent? Because if you look at the example, she went to the market. This example does not need anything else added to it to give it some sense. That means that this whole example is complete by itself. It is independent, it's not dependent on anything else. That means it can stand alone as a complete sentence, right? And this is what you'll have to keep in mind. Next is the subordinate clause, and this is where you'll really see the difference. So, subordinate clause, which is also known as the dependent clause, they cannot stand alone and depends on the main clause to make sense. And this is the most important part because subordinate clauses or dependent clauses are dependent on the other part of the sentence for it to make sense. Like because she was hungry. So this sentence is dependent on this one for it to make sense. She went to the market because she was hungry will be the full sentence. And in that, because she was hungry is the reason why she went to the market. So the part of her going to the market is independent of the fact that she was hungry. But because she was hungry, she went to the market. So you can kind of see the relation of why this is the independent one, why we call it the main clause, and why we call this one the subordinate clause. And the questions they can give you in exam is about identification of main clause or subordinate clause, and that is what you will have to figure out in exercise questions. So it's very important for you to understand the concepts and then apply it on questions, right? And this is where the knowledge of main and subordinate clauses come. Now, how do you identify them? Of course, one thing you'll have to keep in mind that first thing is main clause will give you a complete thought. That means it can stand alone and make sense by itself. So you can easily understand this context by reading the sentence. You will be able to identify that if that part of the sentence is giving sense or not, or does it depend on something else. For example, he enjoys reading. It's good enough. It doesn't need to, like, even if you write the reason, he enjoys reading because it's his favorite hobby or something like that. You don't need to add that. Just the fact that you have this sentence is enough for it to make complete sense. Okay, so that is why this is considered as a main clause. It can stand on its own without depending on any other sentence or any other group of words for it to add more meaning to it. Then there's a subordinate clause. So how do we identify subordinate clause? It gives an incomplete thought. That means once you read it, you won't be able to tell that if it is giving complete sense by its own or not. It'll just be there, and you will feel like this needs something else for it to be complete. Like although it was raining, this is not complete, and that is why this is depending on something else in the sentence for it to make sense, and this is what we call as subordinate clause. Now what is the subordination? It often starts with subordinating conjunctions. Now this is a very important point for you, and this is the point you will keep in mind while you are figuring out these kinds of questions in the exam. You will often find that subordinate clauses are starting with conjunctions like because, although, if, when, since, and so many of such conjunctions you will see before the subordinate clause starts. So like they will be at the beginning of the clause, right? So this is how you will identify them. You can feel free to comment any doubts or anything you have from this topic, because I do believe that students they do get confused here. But if you have anything, feel free to ask. Next, now they've just given you a bunch of examples. So main clauses: I went to bed early because I was tired. This is a subordinate clause. And this is your combined sentence. So once you, like in the exercise, you get sentences like this and you identify it as I went to bed early is the main clause, and because I was tired, this is the subordinate clause, right? This is how you identify. Then what are the quick tips for identification? So you look for subjects and verbs. Like I said, subject and verb is what makes it a clause. And of course, there can be other components of a predicate, but basically, you have to see the presence of subject and verb if you want to identify a clause, right? If a group of words has both and makes sense on its own, it's a main clause. So, your main clause will specifically have the subject and the verb. And if it does have both, but it doesn't make any sense, then it's a subordinate clause. So, again, this is also one important key for you to keep in mind while you are solving the questions in the exam. And do try to make notes, do try to write this part, because these key points is where you will score. Then check for conjunctions. So subordinate clauses often start with subordinating conjunctions. So like I said, subordinating conjunctions is like a category of conjunctions. If you understand this topic on its own, conjunctions also have different types, and subordinating conjunctions is also one of the types. And this is what it tells you there. So, this topic is related to that also. The topic of phrases and clauses is linked to subordinating conjunctions right over here in subordinate clause. Then phrases lack complete structure. If it lacks either a subject or a verb or both, it's a phrase. So, phrase again, we reflect back to what a phrase is. It will have only a subject or only a verb, right? It won't have both together. If it does have both together, then it's a clause, it's not a phrase, right? So, clause is supposed to have subject plus verb, and phrase is supposed to have either a subject or a verb, okay? Or it can even lack both. So it's just a bunch of like noun phrase or preposition phrase, and those were the categories we discussed earlier. Then the summary is, it's just the major points we discussed. So like we discussed phrasal verbs, which is verb plus particle. This particle can be like up, after, right? And then you are linking it with a verb. So that is like a phrasal verb. Then phrases, which are group of words without a complete thought, and they only contain either a subject or a verb or none of them. For example, the red car or running fast. So the red car is only having the subject, which is car, or basically red car, you can say. You can break down the subject into adjective and noun. Then running fast is the verb phrase, because running is your verb and fast is the adverb. Then main clause, complete thought. Main clause gives you a complete thought. Example, she runs. This on its own is enough to give you a complete thought. Then subordinate clause, it gives an incomplete thought because she was late. So if you combine the sentence, she runs because she was late. Right? So subordinate clauses giving you an incomplete thought, and it depends on the main clause for you to have the complete sentence. Then if they ask you in the question, you break down that sentence and identify main clause and subordinate clause. Right. I hope this topic was clear. I hope that you understood it well. If there's still any doubt, feel free to ask me in the chat box or the comment section. And yeah, I'll see you in my next lecture then. Bye bye. See you.